Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, I'm really glad you're here today. How the heck are ya? This is a really interesting episode. I'm talking with Sandra Etherington in this episode, and she has a podcast and she works with family personality types in order to help whoever's raising the children and the children understand personality types in order to have more harmony. And in this episode, we talk about what she typically sees with the highly sensitive person, with the Myers-Briggs. What do we usually tend to fall into if we are highly sensitive? We talk a little bit about how does trauma impact how our personality type shows up. Spoiler alert, we don't really have a clear answer to that. But it was an interesting discussion. She talks a lot about the thinkers and the feelers, the different personality types, and how that might show up if you're parenting. But even if you're not a parent, this is really relevant to understanding the ways that we perceive the world. And if we're dealing with a parent, a partner, a friend who's got a different personality type, understanding the differences may be really helpful. I think you're going to find it interesting. I really don't, I don't like recording these intros right after I record an episode because it just doesn't give me time to process how the interview went. And I always have thoughts after I record. I do think it's interesting. And I really liked when she talks about the typical personality types and how that relates to the highly sensitive person. It felt like it really resonated for me. So I hope you enjoy it. If you are interested in getting the top 10 most downloaded episodes, you'd like to sign up for my newsletter. The link is in the show notes, or you can go to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I'm working on rolling out a small program before the holidays or during the holidays. It's going to be more affordable than the 10-week HSP course. So the advantage of signing up is you'll be the first one to hear about it. Let me tell you a little bit about Sandra. Sandra is a mom of a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. She is the owner of Family Personalities and the co-host of the Family Personalities podcast, a fun and sometimes cheesy podcast that uses personality type to help change the way you see your family. With a background in mathematics, Sandra uses her talent for analysis and data, combined with her training and passion for Myers-Briggs personality type, to help families work together more effectively to raise their uniquely wired children to be the best versions of themselves that they can be. And now, on to the show. Hey, Sandra, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have this conversation today.
Oh, me too. I mean, the highly sensitive person thing was probably my first introduction to understanding your own wiring and how you're different from other people. And then after that came personality type. So this was kind of like my intro into that. And so I love the topic and it's like near and dear to my heart. So I'm really glad to be here.
Oh, good deal. Do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
Yeah, I definitely do.
When did you find out you were an HSP?
I think I want to say it was in college, either that or very soon thereafter. And I don't remember how I came across it, but I do remember I bought a book about it and was reading. I was like, oh, this is me. And it was the first step on my path to accepting my sensitivity as an important part of me and something that I actually value. I wasn't there right off the bat when I first read that. That was like first just like accepting and identifying that I was a sensitive person. And then later on down the line I grew to actually appreciate that part of myself.
It can feel so validating to see yourself in the pages of a book or listening to somebody else talking. Oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. There's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about the term highly sensitive person?
Just the term in general or?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because I feel like it encompasses so much and there's different pieces that some people might relate to and pieces that you don't. And so sometimes that ambiguity can be a little confusing, but I sometimes it's really helpful to have a label and to have a group to belong to explain things. So, I guess I feel in some aspects, I love it. And I love that was like my introduction into this world of really looking at yourself. And in some aspects, I wish it was more closely defined. And maybe that's why I got so into personality type, because it goes more deep into who you are in the different aspects.
Sure. Can you help us understand why is it important to know your personality type, and maybe talk a little bit about if somebody is unfamiliar or this is kind of new to them, what would you say about why is this important?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I work with Myers-Briggs personality type. And so for anyone who's not familiar with that, or you're like, oh, that sounds familiar, but I don't remember which model that is, because there's a lot of different personality type models out there. It's the one that's denoted by 4 letters. So each of the 4 letters stands for something. So for example, I'm an INFJ, and a lot of other highly sensed persons will probably also be INFJs. And that stands for introversion, intuition, feeling, and judging. What I have found that Myers-Briggs has really brought to me is understanding that there really is a different way that I'm coming at the world than other people. And beyond that, there are some of the aspects of myself that I discovered through it was that there's these parts of me that felt uncomfortable, that I was ashamed of. And when I saw that there was a flip side to them, and when I looked at the flip side, I saw, oh, wait, these are the parts of myself that I'm actually the most proud of. And they wouldn't exist without these other parts that I've been made to feel like are bad. And that was like a big self-discovery piece for me. And then taking it beyond that, starting to apply type to other people in my life, I started to become, honestly, a little less judgmental of other people and seeing there are equally great ways of showing up in the world that are completely different from the way that I show up in the world, and having more compassion and empathy for others and understanding the strengths that they bring to the table and the way that they do things. That's kind of been the big gift that personality type has brought to my life and that I like to bring to other people.
So as an INFJ, what would you say are some of the characteristics that show up for you as an INFJ?
Oh boy, INFJs are our dominant function. And so for anyone who's maybe slightly familiar with Myers-Briggs and you don't know, there's this whole deeper level called the cognitive functions, or sometimes they're referred to as the mental processes. That really is the meat of Myers-Briggs. It's not really about those surface letters that you use to find your type. It's really more about these functions that we use. And we have 4, everyone has 4 of them. And that first one is like the really core center of who you are. And for INFJs, it's the same for INTJs. We have this function called introverted intuition. Personality Hacker calls it perspective, but it's this really creative, future-looking process where we really live in our heads in this world of like meanings and ideas, and we have these clear visions that we can't always explain to other people, that really allow us to see where things are going. And we have this ability to be really creative and visionary, and that's one of the greatest strengths, I would say, for INFJs. But then, and that's a very introverted process that happens on the inside, and we don't always readily share that with other people. But we also have this part of us, and a lot of INFJs might mistype as extroverts, because we have this other function. It's our second function, which is called extroverted feeling. And Personality Hacker, which is one of my favorite personality organizations, calls it harmony. And it's about connecting with others, and it's about doing things, making decisions for the collective good of everyone around us. And it really drives us to have these strong interpersonal connections with other people. And so those 2 things really combine to kind of make the INFJ personality. And it can be confusing with that like heavy drive towards that introverted process of meanings and ideas and like thinking through things and having these visions and connecting things, to this like drive to need to connect with other people, which also then exhausts us. And then we go back into our heads. And so a lot of people will describe NFJs as kind of these like contradictory personality types because of this like push-pull that we have between that.
Yeah, I was thinking, and I'm like, do I really want to go here? I scored as an INFJ, and I'm actually a highly sensitive extrovert. And even when I go back and look at some of the questions, I'm still inclined to answer them as an introvert. And I don't know how this fits with what you're talking about. But we can't use the battery charging as a measure for if you're an introvert or extrovert, if you're a highly sensitive person. So for me, I need some stimulation, but not too much. If I get too much alone time, then I get depressed or lethargic. I need to be in a small venue with people that I care about, talking about things that are important to me. And I'm a verbal processor. And I hear people so often thinking that, the way that I found out about being an HSP is I thought I was an introvert because so much of what's written about introversion is really about the highly sensitive person. And so it's just challenging when I want people to have correct information, and I've given misinformation. So I want to own that. But can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I love that you brought that up, because that's the thing about Myers-Briggs type is there's a lot of intricacy to it. And there's a lot of stuff to tease out because it doesn't look the same in every person. What is your full type, or can I guess if you know it?
Sure.
Are you an ENFP?
INFJ.
I thought you said that you tested as INFJ, but that you are an extrovert.
I am an extrovert. I took it years and years and years ago. And if anyone is interested, Jacqueline Strickland has written an excellent article called Introversion, Extroversion, and the Highly Sensitive Person. And we did, I think it's episode 44. So I'll link to it in the show notes at unapologeticallysensitive.com. You can just look to that. She and I have had a number of discussions, including up to yesterday, where she really wants me to retake it because she doesn't think that, she's convinced I'm an extrovert, and I identify as a highly sensitive extrovert. So I don't know what it would be today, but I took it probably in 2007.
Yeah. And let me just say for you and for the listeners that the assessments are notoriously inaccurate. A system that's so complex and that's trying to measure humans who are very complex just can't be done in black and white, yes or no, or like rank 1 to 5 or, whichever one you took. It just cannot come out in that. So it's a really good starting place to get you thinking about it and to kind of, look, this is what it came out as, but you should look at some other types that are close or similar. The best way is really to work with someone who's trained in it and who can walk through it with you. Or if you have the time, which is the way I did it because I became obsessed with it, you can really delve into really understanding the model and going from there. But the assessments are definitely, don't say like, I'm this just because the assessment told me. That's like, they're just not very accurate. But the reason I was guessing ENFPs often also do describe themselves as highly sensitive persons, but not all ENFPs. And ENFPs tend to report themselves as feeling more introverted. Out of all the extroverted Myers-Briggs types, ENFPs self-report feeling the most introverted. And they actually have, maybe I'm getting too far off topic here. Let me know if you need to rein me back in.
No, okay.
But one of my favorite people that I follow in the personality type world is a professor called Dario Nardi. He's a professor of neuroscience at UCLA. And he actually did this big study where he used EEG scans of people's brains, and he would have them come in and do like hours of activities where he was measuring brain activity. And he was looking for patterns to see, do people's brains really work differently based on their personality type? And he did find that, in fact, they do. And I find his study of ENFP brains the most interesting, probably because of my mom's an ENFP and I've done all that, like, how did my mother affect me, like inner work, But their brains are, we have these like different regions in our brains that, information passes through. And most of us have like a well-worn path that like when a certain type of input comes in, we go like, say, I honestly, I do not remember all the different sections and what they do, but they visit this like front right corner and then they visit this other place and they visit this other place. And then there's an output, right? And we kind of have these well-worn paths and these habits of how we're processing things in our brain. But ENFPs, when something comes into their brain, it hits like everything every time. It's like boom, 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 boom. And so their mind is always, the superpower it gives them is this ability to connect all interrelated things so quickly and easily. And they have insights that no one else would have because it hit parts of their brain that no one else would go to. But the downside of it is that it's exhausting because everything is going everywhere. And so they need lots of recharge time compared with other extroverts. Anyway, that's a total side note, but I find that really interesting and fascinating.
Yeah. Well, when Dr. Aaron was doing the research on highly sensitive people, they did fMRIs and showed that there was brain activity that was shown if people were shown pictures of sad people, happy people, that there was more activity. Don't quote me on this because I stink at reporting what's been done, but it's the same thing. And it's fascinating to see that it really is about how we're hardwired and how we process. And when I often ask people about play, often what we choose to do for play doesn't feel like play because we love to use our brains, problem solving and puzzles and sometimes writing and things that are stimulating for us, that's a form of relaxation.
Yeah.
Yeah. What can you tell me about how being an HSP is connected to personality type?
Yeah, you can be an HSP and be, from what I understand, you can be an HSP and be any Myers-Briggs personality type, but there's definitely a tendency that certain types are more likely. So you see a lot of INFJs, a lot of INFPs. I would say even ENFJs, ENFPs. So that NF, which is the intuition instead of sensing, and the feeling instead of thinking, tend to be the most common. But again, I wouldn't rule out the other types. Like if you know you're a different Myers-Briggs type, you can still be a highly sensitive person. In fact, I would even say my son has INTJ preferences on the Myers-Briggs, so he's a thinker. I would say he covers a lot of the things in the highly sensitive person. I know there's like different, I don't remember a lot about what I read a long time ago, but I know there's like different sections kind of in the highly sensitive person.
There's depth of processing and emotional responsiveness, empathy, over-arousal, overstimulation, and sensitive to subtleties.
Yeah.
So the 4 core characteristics.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, when I was going through it for my son, he had like 3 of the 4, not the 4th one, and then for my daughter as well. And she's an ISFP, and they had different 3 of the 4, but yeah. So you can be any type, but definitely it centers around those types tend to be the most likely to identify as highly sensitive persons.
Whenever I've been in large HSP groups, there's always a question about what's your Myers-Briggs, and what I see is usually the INFJ and the INFP. We've done one in the closed Facebook group, but if I remember, or one of you listeners, if you remind me when this episode comes out, I will post another poll in the closed Facebook group, Unapologetically Sensitive, and we can take a poll again and see what y'all are.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah. How does personality type come into parenting if people aren't aware and either the parent or the child has a very different way of perceiving the world?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's incredibly powerful to understand your child's type, for one, because it gives you so much better insight into what you're seeing, into the behaviors you're seeing and why they're doing the things that they're doing. And it was really powerful for me because I think when I first came at parenting, and my kids are still young, they're 5 and 7.5, respectively. When I first came into parenting, I think that I thought, here's everything that I missed out on when I was a kid. Here's everything I wish my parents did. And that's the kind of parent I'm going to be for my kids. I'm going to do everything for them that I needed that I didn't get. And I soon learned very, very quickly that my son is nothing like me. Well, that's not true. There's some things where he's like me, but there's some really big differences. And he doesn't need the things that I needed. He needs completely different things. And same for my daughter. They both have some really big differences to how I was growing up. And so this can help put a language to it and a more precise understanding of how you can help them out as individuals. And then it can also really help interpersonally with your spouse or your co-parent or whatever your family situation looks like, and understanding how they're coming at it, because likely you have not married someone of the same type as you. I can tell you with all the families I've worked with, I have not encountered a couple where they're the same Myers-Briggs personality type as each other. And sometimes that can be hard to understand. Why are we always arguing about this when it comes to parenting? Why is, he or she approaching it this way and I'm approaching it this way? And why are we fighting about, XYZ, or why are we avoiding XYZ, which might be a little more common as a highly sensitive person to avoid instead of fight, right? And so it can just be really helpful with that interpersonal dynamic, understanding each other better, having more compassion for one another and our experience in the family.
It's interesting too, because while many of the HSPs that I talk to, we have this sense of not fitting in and not belonging. What I also find, and this is often true for myself, is I just assume that everybody sees and notices and remembers the same things that I do. And when I work with clients, they're astounded, like, how come my roommate can't remember that I've asked them 27 times to do this? Or how come my partner doesn't see this or get this? And so there is this sense that I think we tend to think that everybody thinks and processes the way that we do. And when we have that ability to know that what's important to me and what I see and what I remember and notice is not the same as what my kids or my partner remember, and then that creates more empathy. And at the same time, we have this tremendous ability to empathize and see more than one position. But I think there's this part around processing that we often tend to just assume that everybody experiences the world the same way that we do.
Yeah. Totally. And that's like what I mentioned earlier. That was one of my big discovery points, is that, other people aren't having the same experience in the world as I am. And that's why they're doing things differently. And then beyond that, there's actually value in the way that they're doing it. Maybe not all the time. There's probably things they do that are destructive as well. But, you can do that inner work too with type of seeing how your type can show up in a more destructive way that sometimes we can be really blind to. Right. And it can be a really great self-discovery process.
Can you talk about some of the specifics that you see in families of maybe what shows up or behaviors that show up in the kids, and maybe their parents have a different personality type, and so what their beliefs are around what parenting should look like? I love tangible stories that we go like, I can relate to that.
Yeah. So the way I look at the differences, say in co-parenting, actually, you can look at it with your kids too, especially if they're older. The two big things that Myers-Briggs measures is the way that we take in and process information from our world. The other big thing that it measures is how we are making decisions. And that doesn't mean like the big decisions. I mean, it means the big decisions too, but more honed in on these little decisions that we're making all day long. Like, how do I respond to this person in the moment? That some of us might take more time to think over, or sometimes we're doing it without thinking. And so it's the how do we make decisions, and then how are we processing information? When there's a core difference in how you're taking in and sifting through information, that can be a communication breakdown. So for example, I like to talk about doing the nightly bath time routine, and say one parent is usually in charge of the nightly bath time routine and asks the other parent to take over it. And if you have, say, the sensing parent, someone who prefers sensing as their way of taking in information, sensing parents tend to be very focused on details. And especially if they're a sensing and a judger, they like routines and doing things the way that they've been done and relying on past experience to inform how to do things. And so having a set routine and doing it the same way each time and paying attention to the details of that routine are really important to them. And so they come at bath time with, a certain routine of how they want it to be done. And when they ask their partner, can you take over bath time tonight? Because, I don't know, say they have some sort of conflict. And let's say the partner has a preference for intuition, which is generally, I would say, more often in a highly sensitive person to have that intuition. We tend to be more big picture focused. We tend to be having to deal in practical details is more exhausting for us. So that parent might be like, the general idea is that the kids need a bath before they go to bed. They might, get into the bath and have all intentions of following their partner's routine. But when it comes down to it, my little one's really upset and having a really hard time with bath. So we did the shampoo, but we skipped the conditioner. And, we stayed in the bath a little bit longer because they were enjoying this, or, whatever it is, but they're skipping details. They're doing it differently because the idea is to get the bath done before bed. But all the little practical details might have slipped because it's just not what they're focused on. And then the sensing parent comes in afterwards and says, you weren't listening to me. I wanted you to do the bedtime routine. And they're like, I was listening to you. I gave them a bath before bed, right? So there's this communication breakdown. And I think on both sides, they're having an understanding for how the other person's coming at it can be helpful. On the sensing parent side, they know if there's a part that's really important to me, I have to really emphasize that, because for them, they're not going to hone in on that unless I've really emphasized it. On the intuiting parent side, understanding that all those details are important to your partner. but then also having some empathy and space for each other. If the sensing parent understands that all those practical details are exhausting and the intuiting parents had a really long day of dealing with practical details, maybe let them off the hook tonight, and vice versa. So
As you were talking, I was imagining myself in both of those shoes. And if I'm the parent doing the bath that's stepping in, I'm definitely the intuitive of let's just go with the flow. And I was thinking about attachment parenting. But if my husband does the task, then I'm the detail person. Did you do this? Did you do that? Like if I'm the one that it's like, we're just going to go with it. But if it's him, then that detail checker comes out, which I thought was very judgmental and interesting. And I own both of those.
Yeah. And it is interesting because we can flex to the other side too, right? And that's something that the Myers-Briggs model recognizes, that some people see it as an either or, but we all have all of these within us. And I was talking about those two main functions that we have, but we have two others on the flip side. So we can, as intuitives, we can go to that sensing side for sure, but it is more exhausting. And so we won't tend to if we don't need to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can you give us some more?
Yeah. So then the other thing that I was talking about that Myers-Briggs measures is those little snap decisions that we're making all day long and how we prefer to make those. And so the two different ways of making decisions in Myers-Briggs are called thinking or feeling. And this doesn't mean what it sounds like. It's not like some of us think and we don't have any feelings. And it's not like some of us only make decisions with our emotions and we aren't logical. It doesn't mean that at all. So kind of like try and take those definitions outside of your head. What it really means is that, let's start with feelers. Feelers tend to prefer to, when they make decisions, take into account the values and feelings that they are feeling or that others around them are feeling. That's like a really important factor in making the decision is how is this going to affect someone else? How is this going to make someone else feel? How does this go in line with my own values and desires? And so they kind of step into a situation empathetically, emotionally, when they're making all these little decisions. Thinkers find that all that is just like noise that gets in the way and muddies up the water, and they feel like they can't make a good decision that way. So they prefer to completely step out of a situation emotionally and only consider the objective data. And so where this comes into conflict, especially, I'd say as highly sensitive person, I'm married to someone who's a thinker. Really, I just get butthurt a lot. I get my feelings hurt because I feel like he hasn't considered my emotions. And so like, I can take an example that I've used before where, my husband leans a lot harder on his thinking process when he's stressed or, something's going on for him. And like one day I came in from the grocery store and I got all the groceries done. I come in and I put them on the counter and he goes, "Where'd you go grocery shopping?" And he already saw the logo on the bag. So he knew I went to Whole Foods, right? But where'd you go grocery shopping? I went to Whole Foods. How much did you spend? Oh my gosh, do we really need this? Do we really need that? And I took that as criticism on myself, which feelers and highly sensitive persons tend to do, and got really upset about it. But for him, he had just come back from like paying a big bill, right? In his office. And he came out and he was like in this efficiency, money spending mindset. And it had nothing to do with me or my feelings or my value. It had everything to do with, we shouldn't be spending money at Whole Foods. Whole Foods is expensive and I just paid this big bill, right? And so we were both coming at this decision of where to go grocery shopping and from like a different standpoint. And I took it personally and he was just looking at the objective things in front of him. So this can also show up with our kids. And I have a son who uses thinking. My daughter uses feeling. And between them, I really see it too. And with the thinkers, so when I approach my son with something like kids who use thinking tend to be more blunt. They're not automatically aware of how they're making others feel. And it's not about being mean. And so I really try and encourage parents who have a thinking child, please don't label your child's behavior. It's not about being mean or being nice. They literally that's not something that's in their capacity for them to consider when they're making decisions is how are other people feeling. And so like for my son, he'll say things that hurt my daughter's feelings. Because for him, like, for example, she asks him, "Do you like this picture I made?" And he says, oh no, I don't like it because I don't like, that color or whatever. And then she gets her feelings hurt. And for him, he's left like, why is she crying? She asked me if I liked her painting, and I was honest. I didn't like the colors in it. And so I have to come into it and explain to him logically what just happened. And thinkers are a lot better if you can explain. They can understand the effect they have on others, and they can learn to incorporate that in their decision making, but they just need it explained to them in logical terms. And especially if you have a thinker who's also a judger, so who has that J at the end, they're really good rule followers if they understand the rule. And so all I had to do was walk my son through, hey, when you tell your sister that you don't like her painting, it makes her feel like her painting is bad, which makes her feel like she's not a good artist, which hurts her feelings, and that makes her sad. So when people ask if you like something that they've done, you shouldn't say that you don't like it. And he was like, oh, I get it. And then he never did it again.
Wow.
After that, because he was able to put it into a rule, but they need those rules to follow versus being able to automatically tell in the moment what's going to hurt someone's feelings.
I'm having two things that are going on because I'm not as versed with Myers-Briggs.
Yeah, I'm getting so into the letters. I hope I'm not confusing people too much.
I'm not as familiar with the Myers-Briggs as you're talking. I'm thinking of scenarios and I'm having this little gremlin going like, I should be able to relate it, but how can I relate it if I don't? But I'm having two trains of thoughts. That one is what I find with many of the HSPs that I work with is we've tried to figure out what the rules are so that we fit in at the expense generally of abandoning what we're thinking and feeling and needing. And so a lot of the work that I do with the clients that come to me is trying to let go of what the rules are because we're in the minority. We're literally 20 to 30% of the population. We're trying to figure out how do we blend in with everybody else. And so the work becomes, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I needing? How do I return to myself and know that that's not going to be selfish or rude or unkind? That be taking care of myself is how I care for others. And the other thing I was thinking about is I have a part of me that I call the taskmaster. And I think for many HSPs, when we had to get stuff done, I imagine her with a ball cap and a clipboard and, a pocket protector. And, she's just there to get stuff done. And when I'm in my taskmaster, I generally lack empathy and sensitivity because I'm just there to get the job done. And so as you were talking, I was thinking about how the way that I conceptualize it is having different parts that often perform different functions to help me survive. And some of them work well and some of them don't, depending on the situation. So I guess my question to you is, within the Myers-Briggs, I'm assuming that there's flexibility within each of the personality types, because my guess is we have dominant personality traits, but we still are able to move between different traits? ?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the really good ways to think of it is like right-handed versus left-handed. So like almost all of us have a dominant hand, and my dominant hand is my right hand. And that would be like our dominant function. We're really good. We're really adept at it. It's comfortable. It feels good. But if you go and try and sign your name with your left hand, what does that feel like? Feels uncomfortable. It's awkward. If you had to write with your left hand all day long, or like use your left hand to cook or whatever, all the things you're doing all day long, it would be really frustrating and tiring. You'd probably get things wrong too. You might drop things more often. Your handwriting would be more messy, but we can use it. And we have to use it. And you can actually get better at it too by practicing. But even if you were to practice a lot with your left hand, your instinct is still always going to be pick up that thing with your right hand. And it's always just going to feel better and more comfortable to you. And it's the same thing with the Myers-Briggs preferences. There's one that's more dominant, that's more comfortable, that's more easy, more natural, and you don't even have to think about it. And then there's one that's your stretch, and it's harder, it's more awkward, it's more frustrating, it's more tiring.
I get asked this a lot and I don't know how to answer it, so I'm going to ask you.
Go for it.
What role does trauma play in your personality types? Do we develop personality types as a survival mechanism because that's what we had to do to survive? And does that go against maybe how we would be had we not experienced trauma?
I wish that I had the answer to this question because I think about it all the time. And I don't think anyone has fully answered it. They know that Myers-Briggs types are there from very, very early, but no one can say whether they're inborn or not. And, I know, are you familiar with the Enneagram types too?
Vaguely.
Yeah. I mean, I see more with Enneagram, I see this, but a little bit with Myers-Briggs too, that I think that from what I've read, from what I understand from my own experience, that there is a predisposition to certain personality types, but that our nurture, our traumas, our whatever can go into informing how that actually manifests. That seems to be the going perception of that, but I don't think anyone knows for sure.
Yeah. Before I knew about being a highly sensitive person, I just assumed that I was hypervigilant and really good at tuning into other people because that's what I needed to do to survive. Mm-hmm. And then learning that it's an innate trait, then it made me think, maybe the people that don't do well when they are raised in less than optimal environments because they don't have that ability to adapt. And I don't know, I'm really curious to know about that. And I'm often asked about where the intersection of trauma is with the trait of being an HSP. And I'm clear that it's an innate trait, but there's some things about it that I'm just still not sure about. Generally, if people don't like being sensitive, there's usually some wounding there. I don't feel qualified to call it trauma, but I do feel comfortable saying wounding. Do you have any insights or what you see around that?
Yeah. I mean, even just personally, I can tell you that, I grew up receiving the messaging that whether it was on my own end, interpreting it that way, or whether it was meant to be communicated that way to me, that my sensitivity was a bad thing, and I was constantly told to stop crying and it's not such a big deal and you're too sensitive and stuff so I guess that was pretty direct messaging now that I think about it, but
yeah,
it wasn't, and my parents weren't intending to be mean about it, but they couldn't understand my sensitivity. They didn't like it. They saw it as a bad thing. And so that messaging came out that it was a part of me that I should hide. And I think that I would say for many years, I tried to show up as someone who wasn't sensitive, and I believed that I wasn't sensitive because I tried to kind of squash that part of myself. But I'm someone who cries very, very easily. And so I would often hold back saying anything or ever sharing anything because I didn't want to cry. And so I think I held that part of myself in, because of my early experiences for sure.
It's interesting. While you were talking, I was thinking in my family of origin, feelings just weren't okay. And so the story that I've told myself is I learned to be very thinking. And what I see oftentimes with HSPs is we either are way more into our thinking brains and need to come back more into our feeling brains, or people are very much in their feeling brains and often very dysregulated, can't manage the intensity of emotions and need to come a little bit more into their thinking brains. Mm-hmm. But as you were talking, I was thinking about, so the rest of the story is when I was 30, I went to a recovery home for 9.5 months from my eating disorder, and we had to do a feelings check-in. I couldn't even tell you what a feeling was. And we had contracts. And so I had a contract that I could only speak in one sentence because I'd learned to use words as a wall. And I had lots of contracts, I think, to try and get me back into that feeling part. And it's been at least 20 years since I was in the recovery home. And now I'm a crier. I cry very easily. I'm very in touch with my feelings. So I really had to learn how to go from being a very strong thinker with no feelings to having feelings and being balanced. But I was thinking as you were talking that I've always loved logic and math came very easily to me. So, maybe that part that's very analytical was already hardwired in. And then the other part, I don't know. I just always want to figure this stuff out. So when I interview people, I'm always trying to put pieces together. So do you have any thoughts?
That's a huge part of the typing process, is sorting out what is the more natural me and what is something that I've put in place either to protect myself or because this is what's valued in society or was valued by my parents. And so I worked really hard on that and have really leaned heavy on that, but it's not my true, more natural way of being. That's a huge part of the typing process, is sorting out the difference between that. And it's really complicated and intricate. And it's actually my favorite part of doing the typing process with people, is really going into that, because I think you can learn so much about yourself when you really look deep at that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think highly sensitive people really want to understand ourselves. So we want to know how we tick and why we tick, and want to understand how other people are, just because I think that sense of making meaning is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And definitely that also goes back to a lot of HSPs being INFJs and INFPs. And I would say that I've find people coming to me for my services who tend to be INFJs and INFPs because we're very self-reflective and analytical about what's going on with ourselves and with the people around us and really wanting to understand on a deeper level.
Right. Well, 50% of clients in therapy are HSPs for the same reasons that people come to you to understand about their personality traits.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes sense. We want meaning, and we benefit more than the non-HSPs because given a positive environment, we take in more, we do better than the non-HSP, and you put us in a lousy environment, we do worse than the non-HSP.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Where's a good place to go from here?
A good place to go from here is, check out what I do. Either if you just want to dip your toe in, you can follow me on Instagram. My handle is Family Personalities. Check out my podcast. It's also called Family Personalities, and or my website, familypersonalities.com. Or if you're ready to kind of dive in and be like, tell me, type my family, type my family, and tell us, give us some tips. How can we function better as a family? How can my parenting improve? You can book a free intro consult with me at familypersonalities.com.
Well, that sounds great. What have you noticed has changed with the families that you've worked with? Are there typical challenges that you see consistently across the board, or is it pretty varied?
I think people really walk away with a better understanding of their children, the pain points between them and their children, and why they're happening. I think a lot of times we have this same thing, the same struggle with our kid over and over again. Either we can even get our feelings hurt by our children. And there's like a better understanding of why that's happening and how to prevent it and how to look at things more from their perspective is kind of the thing that I've noticed the most coming out of it.
Yeah. We're needing to wrap up. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that is important to cover before we end?
No, I think you've got it.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right. Bye-bye. Again, I'm curious to know what you thought. Was that helpful? Not helpful? What's your personality type? I know people that really love knowing what their Myers-Briggs type is, their Enneagram type, that it's really something that helps them understand themselves deeply. So curious to know how that landed with you. I'm wondering how you're managing. It's been pretty stressful. It's interesting, as Sandra was talking about the thinking and feeling and having that sense of justice and thinking about what's best for everybody. If you are finding that this is a challenging time, you're feeling more anxious, depressed, irritable, you're not sleeping as well, you're having a hard time functioning and you need some extra support, I would really encourage you to find somebody to talk to, whether it's a friend or a partner, if you can find a group, whatever it is, so that you get the support that you need. If you want to work with me, I have a few spots open right now. Not sure where I'm going to be when you hear this, but I really love being able to help people figure out how to thrive and how to survive during great times and challenging times. We will get through this. I know I say this every week, but I really want people to know we will get through this, even if it is tough. I will be launching the online HSP groups coming out in January of 2021. I'm looking to get my calendar planning ahead, and I'm going to try and launch something small around the time of the holidays to provide support at a much lower cost. I think I said that in the intro. Oh well, you get to hear it again. I do hope that you're doing well. I hope that you are managing during this time. I really appreciate each and every one of you, and I'm so grateful to have you as listeners. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.